Good late morning to everybody. Thanks for coming. This session is called Raising the Bar Using Kanban for Agile and Sustained Success. It's a very wordy title, but I wanted to convey the content of the presentation. And gives you an idea why my wife didn't let us name our kids. So my name is Tim. I am the Vice President of Software Product Development for a company called Follett School Solutions. We are a K-12 education company, based primarily here in the United States, although we do have a global presence. This is a little washed out, so maybe a little difficult to see, but just to give you a sense of kind of who we are, our size and scale and scope. Our software is used in the United States by about 60,000 schools every day. We have about 5 million users here in the United States and in Canada. And our renewal rate for our software, which is primarily sold as a software service model, is about 95%. It's pretty good in a pretty competitive education technology market. So let's talk about a little bit of history before we start. We'll go back to 2011. That's when I joined Follett. Before there, I was working for another educational publisher, Houghton Mifflin Harcourt. I've been in education technology for about 15 years. I've been in software for about 20 years now, believe it or not, for me. So in 2011, what was happening? Besides Charlie Sheen talking about tiger blood, besides the Kardashians going through another divorce, there were things happening in the educational marketplace that were making a pretty significant impact. As far as Follett's business was concerned, historically we've been a company that has relied on book distribution. We're not a publisher, we're a book distributor. We sell books through K-12, and we have software which helps enable that sale. Either it's library automation software or it's inventory management software. E-books started to come on into the education marketplace right around 2007 and 2008. And Follett lagged here. They were making a lot of money in print, and as a result they got complacent. In David's keynote presentation earlier in the day, he talked about complacent companies and the fragility of complacency, and we observed that quite a bit. Also, late 2010, a major disruptor in education technology, the iPad. The iPad made a difference for a few reasons. One, it created expectations from the consumers of a high-end consumer experience. For those of you that have kids in school, or when you were students in school that used software, what did people think about the user experience on those products? Would you rate it as bad or really, really bad? Because that's what most of our customers had. The iPad made a huge inroads into education and created this really great, really slick experience that our customers were beginning to expect from all of our products. At the same time, the iPad made distributed computing within the school a reality. So it launched a lot of what was called one-to-one initiatives. And these are pretty popular in school districts now, but 5-6 years ago it was really new. That means one computer or one device for every student in the school. This all created expectations within the marketplace that we really struggle with as a big company. So Follett School Solutions, a $500 million company. It's like turning an aircraft carrier when you want to change strategic direction. So we had these market forces kind of against us. The other piece that was a challenge at the time was we had done an employee engagement survey in 2011 and found that across the board, employee morale, employee engagement was down. Now, it's not unique. There's a survey that was done by Gallup in 2013 that states that only about 30% or about a third of everybody working at a company feels engaged. What does that mean? They feel like their input is valued. They feel like they're self-directed. They feel like they've got a say. They feel connected to the company and the purpose of the company. We were somewhere close to this in terms of our engagement, and that was down significantly. We saw about an 18-point decline in over 5 years for Follett. And we were losing a lot of our identity. The last piece here was decreased innovation. When we launched our Destiny library management product in 2003-2004, it was the first web-based library automation system that was available at any large scale. That was revolutionary at the time. Most of our competitors were still dealing with client-server solutions. This was a fully deployable, fully hostable. At the time we called it an application service provider, but now a software service sort of model, subscription-based software. We kind of lost touch with that innovation. We had gotten complacent and sort of rested on our laurels. Our feedback loops as a result were really long with not only our customers, but internally. So in short, we needed change. We needed to change a lot. We're at a point where things were going to go either in a positive direction and we're going to have continued sustained success, or we're going to become one of those companies that sort of falls by the wayside, rides the long tail into the sunset. So before we start, let's talk a little bit about the company and the culture itself. Follett has been doing Agile, XP, Extreme Programming, since about 2003. So they've been doing it for a long time. Those are people pairing together, co-located folks. Those are giant CRT monitors, non-ironic mustaches. So we've been doing things like this for a long period of time. We use velocity as our relative measure of performance and ability to deliver, but there's a challenge here. When I came on board, in order to catch up with the competition, new entrants in the market, we were given a mandate. We need to double our engineering staff, i.e. double our engineering output. We'll talk about that in a little bit later. We were going to need more capacity. We were aware of Kanban. I was aware of Kanban, had read about it, had not tried it, but was really interested in the concept of flow, managing flow. The problem was that we are an engineer-centric company. How many people here work for a software or technology kind of firm? Show of hands. And how many of those people who raised their hands would say that their culture is driven by engineers? Oh, okay, a good number. We were that culture, right? Not necessarily bad, but that was our culture. We were an engineer-centric company. The engineers really decided a lot about priority. Engineers determined capacity. Engineers gauged interest. They were the heartbeat of the company. In 2011, we had purchased another company up in Massachusetts, which, when this picture was taken, we had an engineering staff of probably about 50 people. We bought a company in 2008 that brought us to about 80 people. We bought a company in Massachusetts that brought us to about 150 people. We have 3 locations now: Greenville, South Carolina, Hingham, Massachusetts, and the office here in McHenry, Illinois. That made pair programming very difficult to do. Not unachievable, but difficult. It made co-location impossible. So the things that would make us successful before, the things that we really identified, that we built our identity on in terms of Agile, particularly the co-location aspect, that was no longer going to be available. We needed to do something different and something fast and something that we were uncomfortable with. So as Scooby would say, we had a problem, a serious problem. The first area we looked to address this was around process. So as managers, right, we got in a room, we said, okay, well, what can we do in order to improve our capacity? What can we do to improve our flow? The subject of Kanban was brought up, and the core tenets of Kanban really appealed to us and still do. First, we wanted to make all our processes visible, explicit, all the work visible. We wanted to limit the work in progress, and we wanted to manage our flow. Pretty basic stuff. So making our processes explicit, we wanted to answer these 3 questions. So how is work getting done? We had different engineering teams, different engineering cultures. We had some alpha males, alpha dogs, who were kind of leading those teams. And work was being done and achieved in a different way in different teams. So the first thing we needed to do is really get a sense of how does that work actually get done? From the time it's conceived all the way time till it's delivered. And what does done mean? Some folks thought that done was, well, it's hand off to QA. Some folks thought done was released to production. In most cases, done meant that we had some level of sign-off and approval from our product management team. But what we used to determine that level of sign-off was inconsistent. And who needs to know when something's done? So not just the collective done, not just from the time something is begun all the way till it's completed, but what about when your individual task is completed? Who needs to know? Who needs to know, and how do they know when you're working across 3 campuses? Who needs to know, and how do they know when you're working across multiple time zones? You've got staff in the Ukraine, and you've got some developers in South America that are working as well. Real difficult to read, but suffice to say, this is our step to make our processes explicit. The top here just sort of kind of shows a simplified process that we used during our original XP days. Really engineer focused, really build test driven, right? Once we got under the covers a little bit and talked about what does it actually mean to deliver software, we came up with this bottom row here, which is color-coded here to describe different disciplines, but it puts a lot more emphasis on the backlog, on getting work ready for handoff, for doing all the things that done actually means, which could be whether it's ready for test or whether the testing is in progress, whether there's ATs written against it, has there a demo been done? All those things that done truly means now is represented in our process. Making all the work visible, all of it. That was difficult. There's a lot of secret work going on in companies, and I guarantee if we poll the people in this room, the vast majority of people would say there is work that's being done, skunk works, under the covers, what have you, that is invisible to the organization. The reason why this work needs to be visible, primarily, it costs money. It takes time. It takes resources. As a manager, my job is to be an effective steward of the resources of the company. That's my primary job. And if there's work being done there which is not visible, it's very difficult for us to calculate the return on that. It's a distraction. And if it's really important, it needs to be, the visibility of it needs to be raised up and needs to be discussed. Limiting the WIP. Okay, this was a tough sell. Maybe counterintuitive for why it was a tough sell. In an engineering-centric organization, centric culture, it was very difficult to tell my developers they cannot pull in more work. They wanted to know why they couldn't get more stuff done. Well, the problem was the way that we were organized, we have 4-to-1 developer to test ratio. We have a high degree of reliance on automated testing. So that automated testing provides a little bit of freedom in terms of our approach to testing. We can do a lot more of it in an automated sense, not necessarily in a manual sense. We didn't want those queues building up on the tester end. We didn't want those queues building up in the demo end for product review and approval. So we needed to limit the WIP. We needed to limit the amount of work that could be pulled into the next area down the line. That was a tough sell. The way that we sold this is by preaching queues are bad. They're bad. They're really bad. Ask anybody in our company, they'll tell you just how bad they are. When it comes to managing flow, we focused on first, it needs to be value driven. I talked about the invisible work going on, right? That invisible work has some value, and if it doesn't, you shouldn't do it. But if it does, it needs to be discussed. All this work needs to be value driven. There needs to be a value metric assigned to the work that's being done. And it needs to be measured and discussed. Benchmarking. So we work with Michael Ma, and for those of you who have been at other Agile conferences, you may have seen Michael do a keynote speech. He works for a company called QSM. And Michael has been benchmarking our projects. He started in 2006, and he's come back in 2013 and has been benchmarking them since. He calculated a productivity index for us. Proud to say it's 4 times value higher than the industry average there. That was the 2006-2007 benchmark for productivity. That was our do no harm. Cannot do any harm. When we started our journey on Kanban and rolling it out, we brought Frank, who's over here. Hey Frank, how are you? Nice to see you again. We met him in Massachusetts, and he talked to us about rolling this out. And one thing that really stuck with me that Frank talked about was avoiding the J. When you roll out a new process, this Satyr change model here, when you roll a new process, there's always a dip. There's always a dip in productivity. When you've got a benchmark of productivity that's 4.5 times higher than the industry average, and you put out a new process that's supposed to improve productivity, that's going to improve engagement, improve value to customers, and you have a dip, a significant dip there, that's bad, right? That's when guys like me get fired. That's when my team gets fired. Customers leave the company. All kinds of bad things happen. So we wanted to have a process that really avoided the J, right? So we wanted a process that was going to complement what we were already doing. This sort of Russian doll, this is really washed out on the screen up here. You can see the slides online, but this Russian doll view here, we've got extreme programming, which is kind of our DNA. It's at the core of what we do. Produce working code, failing fast. Embracing change. We are a test-driven development organization. We are not going to change that with this rollout. That was going to remain intact. What we were going to do is wrap those practices in a meta process, Kanban, which would look to have visible and explicit work. We're going to limit WIP, eliminate the queues where we can, and we're going to maximize the flow. And then all of that is wrapped in a pretty comprehensive program management model where we do a lot of the traditional management practices, things like resource planning and business analysis and user experience design, project management, managing the product backlog. In each layer from the inside out feeds information to the subsequent layers. Once you get the process nailed down, you need to really take into consideration the people. While it's a manager's inclination to look at process first, I really want to stress and emphasize the importance of people and getting people on board, particularly when you're undergoing some fundamental change. In order to get feedback from people, We sat with people individually, one-on-one. I met with people one-on-one. We met with small groups. We met with large groups. We met as a department. We talked to people about what did they want. The first thing that they told us what they wanted out of the company was to grow. They want to grow their skills. They wanted to work on cool stuff. And they wanted to be part of a team. This last one for me was disappointing in that they were already part of a team. We were building software, we were releasing software. Why don't they feel like they're part of a team? That team aspect had really been lost. You went from an organization, 2004 when you built Destiny, it was 8 guys in a boardroom with a bunch of card tables writing code, to 20 guys, to 40 guys and girls, and 50. Now you're 150 people. You're not part of a team at that point. You're part of a machine. So we needed to figure out a way to make it a little bit more local. Are people here familiar with Daniel Pink, the research he's done on Drive? If you haven't, you can just Google, there's a great little YouTube video. It's about 12 minutes long, kind of summarizes a lot of the main points of what Daniel talks about. But Daniel talks about 3 core principles when it comes to getting engagement and motivation for highly skilled knowledge workers. The first is autonomy. People want to be self-directed. And Daniel in his book talks about if you observe children, you watch kids play, they exhibit this autonomy and this desire for autonomy and self-direction. For those of you who have kids, I've got 3 myself, the first word they learn is no, right? Exerting their autonomy, their independence. That's not a fluke, that's human nature. The next piece is mastery. People want to get better, particularly in software development. We don't do this because it's just a job, we do it because we love it. Many of us started programming when we were kids. Now kids start programming when they learn to read. And this desire to get better at something is what motivates people. The last is purpose. And this is probably the most important level of the motivation game here. You want to connect people to a larger cause. Now, for my company, this is easy, right? We help kids learn, we help kids read. We improve literacy scores. If you can't get behind that, well, man. One of my first jobs out of college was I wrote billing software for lawyers to bill insurance companies. No offense to anybody who does that type of work now. It's noble work, it's necessary work. It did not light my fire, right? This does, right? And that's what we're looking for, to build a culture where this resonates with folks. Again, brightness on this is washed out, but that's fine. This is Dr. Bruce Tuckman. He talks about the stages of group development. This is something we took into consideration as well when we looked at the people aspect of what we were trying to change. He talks about 5 kind of basic stages of group development. The first is forming, people kind of getting together. The first is norming, what's my job, what's my role here, what's my place on this team. The second is storming, people clashing, trying to figure that out. Second is norming, saying, okay, now that I have my role on the team, this is how I contribute, this is how I can produce. The fourth stage here is performing. Most people, many teams, they never get to this performing stage. This is the people that really begin to knock it out of the park. In David's keynote presentation, these are the robust organizations, right? These are the organizations that are really producing high levels of great code, of great product for customers. Last is adjourning. This is kind of a feedback loop. What we wanted to do was to figure out how can we get to there as quickly as possible? How can we get people to the performing stage as quickly as possible? The approach we settled on was delivery teams. What we did was we took 4 developers and 1 tester as sort of a self-contained unit. They were self-directed. They were going to sign up for the work that they were going to do. They were going to move together from project to project. We spent a lot of time trying to figure out the right chemistry and makeup of this team. We wanted to encourage conflict and disagreement because those are good, those are healthy. We didn't want groupthink. But we wanted people that were going to really thrive with their coworkers. So the self-directed approach only works if these folks are accountable. And accountable in corporate America is one of those words that's typically used only in its negative connotation. Like, if you screw up, you're fired, right? But we wanted the positive connotation of accountable to be used as well. And that is, they're responsible for the delivery of everything that they're working on. They do the design, they do the test, they help contribute to the stories, they engage the product owner, they do the product demos. They function as a self-contained team. Together, they're more than the sum of their individual parts. While we were ramping up and trying to double our capacity, we were onboarding a lot of external resources. We went from 150 full-time employees to 240 full-time equivalents, 90 consultants that we brought on. So we look to leverage this delivery team model to help onboard external dev and test resources by adding 2, 3 kind of individuals to each delivery team. That delivery team could onboard those resources. They could use that additional capacity to take on additional stories and deliver more code. In the beginning of my talk, I talked about innovation. Innovation kind of being stifled. A couple points on innovation really quickly, because this is something I run into a lot, particularly in large companies. Small companies are good at this. Large companies, not so much. First is the expectation around innovation. Innovation is not inventing the iPad, right? That was a release, but that was a result of a lot of small innovations, right? A lot of micro innovations that added up to something much larger. So what we wanted to do to encourage innovation within our team was let people know that small or incremental innovations have really, really big impact over long periods of time. So empowering these teams to be self-directed and accountable, to make their own decisions, gave them the freedom to be able to make those incremental innovations. And the tight controls, they really, really strangle innovation. I can't emphasize this enough. If you're micromanaging people, if you're asking them, are they going to be done with something every few minutes, at best, you're going to get the minimum deliverable. Give people some freedom, and you'll be surprised what they can do. Let's talk about, we'll talk about the impact of some of these practices, the process and people practices. First on the backlog. We saw an overall improvement in planning for a couple reasons. One, we were able to identify different classes of service on our Kanban board that help support the needs of our business. We had an expedite one, because those occur. But we work a lot of contracts within the education industry or state agencies or local education administrations. So a lot of our work is deadline-driven, date-driven. So we have a class of service around delivery date-driven. A class of service around competitive advantage. So giving our business different classes of service help give them the flexibility to prioritize the work and improve the overall planning process for us. It exposed backlog queues. So when I first came on board in 2011, people were frustrated with our ability to deliver software, and they're struggling to figure out why. One of the reasons why, was we had a lot of back and forth between the business analysts and story writers and the engineers. Remember, we were an engineer-centric organization, so the story wasn't done until the engineer said, yeah, it's done. Yeah, I can work on that. So changing that, flipping that, letting each discipline exercise its own expertise, it helped remove a lot of those backlog queues, and it also improved overall story quality. We got closer to what our customers wanted. We do a customer value assessment where we survey our customers, and our scores went up. Our satisfaction scores went up. Our net promoter scores, they went up. The team, initially, very skeptical. Very skeptical of any change. But after a while, they did begin to feel more in control. I think the delivery model piece helped. I think any process without a people aspect to it is only half of the equation. So giving them folks, their peers, to kind of work through this together, to work through those 5 stages of Tuckman's group formation, I think it helped. And after a while, they began to have fun with it, right? The teams developed their own identity. We have a team in Greenville, South Carolina, they call themselves All Y'all. We have a team in McHenry, Illinois called Avengers, and my favorite team in Hingham is called Wrath of Kanban. So, and improve morale, right? People could have fun with some of that. A great quote here by Jim Barksdale. Not a great company, but a great quote, right? If all we have is data, let's look at it. If we have data, let's look at it. If we have opinions, let's go with mine. So let's look at the data, right? So this is from Michael Ma's analysis of our productivity. You'll see the black line is kind of the mean for agile software projects. Sorry, that's all products. Michael's got, for just a little background, Michael has a software database of 10,000 different software projects, and he'll benchmark your project against all those other projects to give you some metrics on how you do, right? Because we thought if we're going to be a best-in-class service software delivery organization, then we want to know not only how we do internally, we want to know how we do stacked up to the competition, the global competition. So in general, our schedule's very fast, very fast. Our teams are larger, but remember, during this time, we're trying to ramp up. We're trying to get as much stuff out as we can, right? We have fewer defects, which is these little dots these all represent individual software projects. Here's kind of the average here. This is kind of the best. So you want to be lower on the defect one. And our productivity index is consistent with previous releases. So all in all, pretty successful, right? But I know if I zip through those slides, so for those of you who are paying attention, you probably saw this, so I will go back to it. We did have a setback. On a couple of our projects, we had about 2.5 times more defects. And our staffing was way above the industry norm, right? So that was these guys, and these guys, right? So what happened here, right? We were doing Kanban, we're doing XP, we're test-driven development. I've got 200,000 automated tests that run on my software every night. How does this happen? Well, remember when I said we double engineering staff? What we didn't do was we didn't make the onboarding process explicit. In our organizational model, we had each team kind of onboarding 1, 2, 3 kind of individual consultants. They all did it differently. They all did it inconsistently, and as a result, the output was inconsistent. And we had defects that sat in queues. We had defects that had to wait for experts. And as we got closer and closer to our release time, those defects either got flushed by saying, close enough, or they got kicked down the road and said, it's tech debt, we'll fix it later. And we did. And we've been paying for that. This software project here, this was September 2014. Our back-to-school release, which takes place August 1st this year, finally cleans this up. David talked about this earlier, right? You can make those quality trade-offs, but you're going to pay for them for a long time. Wrapping up. So what's next? We still have queues. We haven't eliminated all of our queues. Our biggest queue right now is in our release train, right? In a release column. We're still on a regular release cycle. Some of our products release every 6 weeks, some release once a quarter. But there's a lot of stuff that queues up in there. We haven't solved that problem yet. We're looking to continuous delivery. We've piloted some projects, easier with some of our newer stuff, much harder with our older stuff, to help us get that queue whittled down so that we don't have hundreds of items sitting in that release queue, but maybe just a handful. So my summary, why this worked for us? Well, it complemented a lot of what we were already doing and what we were doing well. The most important point, again, want to emphasize this, I said it earlier, but if you're considering a change, particularly a process change of this magnitude, please consider the people. Ask the people on your teams, ask the people in your organization, get input from as many places as you can, because if you don't design a system for the people to be successful in this, no process will be successful. They just won't. Peter Drucker, for all you management geeks out there like me, kind of the grandfather of modern management, has this great quote. Read it for a second. My entire career of software, the only thing I could never get was time. I could never get more time. I could always negotiate more people. I could always negotiate a reduction of quality, believe it or not. Time was difficult. And time's getting worse, right? You've got major disruptors. And for education technology, there's $10 billion in education technology venture capital funding in the marketplace last year. They're out there. The people who are going to eat your lunch, they're there. So if you can't take care of time within your organization, there's going to be somebody else who's going to take your customers. All right, questions? Yep. Yep. Oh, we got a microphone.
I think it's on. Yeah. Okay. Thanks for your talk. It was really good. What I was particularly interested in, one of the concepts you said. So when you first introduced this, you got your test teams actually to sign up for their work, like they would pick.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering how you did that, because in an environment where the morale was very low, how did you deal with the complacency factor, or people oh, here we go? I was just curious how you guys broke through that to make it successful.
Yeah, that's a good question. It was the whole team, right? It was the delivery team, developer and test combined. We appeal to their sense of decency, first of all. I mean, we've got customers. They care about our customers. It's that level of purpose, right? Independent of all the BS that was happening organizationally, they still wanted to be able to satisfy our customers. And they still had some confidence in the importance of what we were trying to do and what we were trying to deliver. So that was one strategy that we used, was just to help emphasize that customer focus. The other piece was just, look, we know we haven't been successful doing what we're doing before. Why don't we try something new? People will experiment if you give them the opportunity to give feedback after it's done. You know, if you ask them to experiment, but you disregard their feedback, they don't see any change, then they're just going to opt out. Yes? We had a microphone, sorry.
You talked briefly about the role of the manager in this kind of environment with the kind of principles you're trying to talk here. Can you say a little bit more about how you see the role of the manager?
Sure. We view managers at Follett as administrative folks, right? My job is, as the head of the department, you know, I'm helping set up the budget for the year. I've input on the strategy and such, but you know, it's very much a servant leadership approach to management. When we go back several slides here to our overall process structure, kind of the bulk of the heavy lifting of what you consider more traditional management is being done in this program management bucket here. And these program managers are, they're not necessarily the direct managers of the individuals on these teams. They're just people who have kind of a larger solution view, and they help steer the ship. We have engineering managers that help provide day-to-day direction on kind of career growth and such, but the vast majority of the direction of the team is set by the team itself when they opt out. It's not necessarily a holacracy, but it's certainly a much more flattened management structure.
Thank you.
Yeah, just could we have, typically we have one manager for every 25 or 30 employees. Yep.
Hi there. Thank you. I recall you made a point about having excess demand at the story acceptance phase, that engineers were having very, very tight tolerances on what they considered a story to be done. I wondered, if I understand correctly, it sounds like the team self-organized to fix that problem. I wondered if you could talk a little bit about how they changed the policies to enable that.
Sure. So there were a few things that we saw. The first was we brought in somebody from the outside to be kind of a story writing guru, right? A lot of the people that had become that business analyst role are people who'd kind of try to move laterally in their career or move over into a development role from like tech support or maybe from a product management. So they didn't necessarily have a lot of the great skill set needed to write really great requirements and stories. So we brought somebody from the outside to help establish that discipline. So that was the first. The second thing we did was in the explicit process piece, we built in an explicit feedback loop for the review of that story. And then we watched how long it took for stories to get through. So the BA, the business analyst, after they would write the story, they'd present it to the team, and it would sit in an in-team review. And there was a queue there that we measured. So if stuff was sitting in there for days, we'd say, the team, what's going on, right? Why are these things aging here? Because we have a queue building up here that's affecting everything. So bringing some visibility to that in those discussions applied a little bit of pressure for the team to say, yeah, good enough, right? And move it down the line. So
To follow up, if I understand correctly, you're saying rather than strictly enforce a definition of here's a good story, now comply, you simply made the length of the queue visible to everybody and said, now what do you want to do to make it shorter?
well, and we honored our WIP limits, right? So you know, you can only have so many stories in review. So if there's only the WIP limit for that particular project, and we've got multiple boards for multiple teams. So I showed a simplified version of a board, but we've got you know, each delivery team themselves has their own board, and then there's a program board, and then there's an overall departmental board. So the WIP limits vary depending on each of those boards, but we try to make those small so that we get work through there as quickly as possible, because that was one of the big bottlenecks.
You said you had a setback, and it was a defect that happened, and the cause of it was because teams were onboarded later on at different intervals during standard. What did you do to correct that?
Question is, what do we do to correct the onboarding setback? First, we standardized the onboarding process, right? Each team was onboarding folks differently. One of the things, believe it or not, that was a pretty simple fix was just to have a consistent image of a developer machine when we brought people on board. Different teams had varying states of readiness for when external consultants would come on. Some folks would have an image of a machine deployed and ready to go, and those developers could code right away. Sometimes they had to sit around for a while and wait for that to be created. So standardizing that onboarding process, and that was, each year we sit down as a leadership team and we say, all right, what did we not do particularly well? And one of them was onboarding. So that was one of our initiatives last year to help that onboarding process work better. So the machine configuration piece was one. To have them go through some type of formal level product training before they write any single line of code on the product. Kind of a no-brainer, but was not being done, right? People were kind of just being thrown into the mix. We also shifted the amount of work that was done by internal versus external resources. So the teams were, when they were adding external resources to the team, they were taking on any work that came into the pipe. And some of that work was high risk, high value work. So we try to set some boundaries for resources when they come on board. Let's try to get them, build some success and say lower risk, tasks that could still be high value that they could tackle, whether it's doing some tech debt work or doing some bug fixes or doing some minor stories, and then let the team that has more experience tackle the more complex work. Other questions?
I guess my question is, how did your non-IT organization have to adjust through this change?
How did they have to adjust? Well, it's a good question. Probably the biggest impact was our product management organization, because they're the folks that are most tightly tied to our development process that aren't in development. The biggest change for them was to categorize the work in terms of class of service. That was a big change for them. When we were in the old XP days, we were kind of running things on an iteration by iteration basis. And the class of service approach it required them to take a longer term view. While this may seem a little heavy-handed, but the approach that we took was during our strategic planning process, we kind of identified sort of our themes that we wanted to get done strategically. And we tried to categorize those into class of service that we were aware of, whether it was fixed delivery date or competitive advantage or something that had to be completed based on an emerging customer need. And we would identify those within the strategic plan, and then we use version 1 as kind of our planning tool, and we'd enter those all into like a product board. So that got them used to a little bit more categorizing that work, and now they're really good at it. It was a little rough at first for them. Everything was either normal or expedite was kind of the first couple months. So, yeah.
So I heard you say you're using version 1 as opposed to physical boards, right?
Yeah.
Any challenges with the tool? Are you able to get good, is the tool providing you with good data for decisions and things like that?
Yeah, lots of challenges with the tool. Like any enterprise tool, doesn't do exactly what you want, but does most of what we want, right? The complaints I get from the engineers are, man, I just wish I could just integrate seamlessly with Git so that when I complete a story, it just updates the status. That's something we have to consider. They've done a pretty good job recently in version 1 and providing a lot of support for Kanban and Kanban metrics. Their boards are actually more flexible than I had hoped they were going to be, so they allowed us to do things like enter WIP limits and such. And the fact that we have multiple boards for different levels of the organization has been pretty good. I think if there's any, complex calculations that need to be done, my program managers, they still do them offline. They'll still do them in Excel. Yeah.
Thanks. Did you have any strategies for setting and evaluating your WIP limits over time?
Did I have any strategies for setting and evaluating them? Yeah, we did. At first, we just said that our WIP limit was going to be the number of resources that could do that function, depending on what level we were at, times 2. That was our original WIP limit. And sometimes we failed miserably, and sometimes we succeeded wildly. So we just adjust. We adjusted the WIP limits for probably the first 6 months, 7 months. And the WIP limits actually are different on a team-to-team basis, right? Because some teams work on things that are a little bit more complex than the others. We found that the folks that are working on the legacy product, they can have higher WIP limits because a lot of the work that they do is either refactoring existing code or they're extending existing functionality. The folks that are working on the newer stuff, we have lower WIP limits because it's riskier. So it's varied over time, but we still adjust them pretty consistently. So we have a CFD that we look at periodically just to every 2 weeks we sit down as a leadership team and look at our cumulative flow diagram and just take a look, just eyeball it and say, is something look screwy here? Do we need to adjust WIP limits? Do we need to change the process? Is there an issue with communication? So that's what we do. We've got time for one more question, if anybody. No? All right. Well, thank you.